we're going to take a quick trip through the cosmology and then a deep dive into what our folks at the CIA call WSFM. Not a radio station, it stands for Weird Science and Frickin' Magic. All the classified technologies, where they're located, when they were developed, how they've been deployed, et cetera, and so on. But before we can even get into that, we have to start with something more fundamental. And that is, what is this thing called reality that we live in, the cosmos? And I know this sounds like, well, what does that have to do with these unacknowledged special access projects and their technologies and facilities? Everything. Because if you don't understand what's sitting in front of you on the screen right here, there's no way you're going to understand the kinds of technologies we're going to cross over into very quickly today. So first I want to go through this concept of, everyone knows about the conventional universe. 3D, 4D if you consider time, a dimension, some do, some don't. It's the material universe, space-time, matter, light and dark matter, dark energy, et cetera, and so on. That's what astrophysicists, star systems, galaxies, subatomic particles, conventional physics and conventional understanding. Then there's the conscious universe, and there are other dimensions connected to the conscious universe. And you see where I've done sort of an overlap. So we have a physical body, but we're conscious, and we can be aware of awareness. And because we can become aware of awareness, we can remote view, we can see the future, see the past, and of course the masters and rishis of old could teleport, materialize, dematerialize, etc. So all conscious, higher intelligent life forms have the ability to manifest. That's a strange sound, it's like from that horror movie. It have the ability to do affect the physical world and the physical cosmos in ways that an interstellar, transdimensional extraterrestrial civilization can. This is lesson number one. It's a hard lesson. It's a really deep one. So if you can imagine all the stories you've heard of the masters of old, or even people in the modern era who have levitated, well, you can do a levitation, mass cancellation, so-called anti-gravity, through resonant field electromagnetic systems. Now let's talk about remote viewing. Everybody's heard of remote viewing, CIA programs, DARPA, DIA. I know a lot of these guys. Well, that's the ability to be a seer and use consciousness to see something at a remote distance or a remote point in space-time. But that can be done through augmentation using electromagnetic systems, which is what interstellar civilizations have and covert programs have. This is the part that you're not going to hear and see in Hollywood. And that's what you're going to hear about today. So you'll see that I put that extraterrestrial civilizations, all of them, that are higher, intelligent, sentient life forms. That's how I'm defining this. They're capable of being aware of awareness. And humans. And then there's this subsection here, covert technologies that are augmented by the study of ET systems and transdimensional stagecraft. These are the ones that are going to be a big deep dive in a few moments. You understand? Because it isn't just, everyone thinks that the secret technologies have to do with Lockheed Martin and Northrop's and Boeing's anti-gravity, black triangles, and flying saucers and things like that, which they do have and have had since the 50s. Perhaps a little sooner in terms of prototypes or a little earlier. However, this part has not been looked at by the public. And this is what I want to pull the curtain back. Because there's what I call a strange phenomenon going on, where you have sort of a Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, pulling strings and levers, scaring the hell out of people with stuff that looks other dimensional and looks extraterrestrial that is being run from an unacknowledged special access project. And I know who they are, where they're operating from, what their technologies are, and what their modus operandi is. That you need to know. And you need to know it 50 years ago with the advent of those. So that is why this is its own, and this we'll see a later slide. Now, in the other conscious dimensions, we'll take a quick trip through these. Probably everyone in this room, if it was a physics class, they'd be going, huh? But everyone in this room presumably knows what this is. But let's relate it. Let's pretend there's someone here from the School of Physics. You're conscious and awake. You go to sleep at night. You awaken in a lucid dream where you're flying. And that dream ends up being precognitive. You see something that happens the next day or the next week or the next year. This is a lucid precognitive dream. How many people have had one at some point in their life? Very large percentage of this audience. Most humans have, although most scientists won't admit to it because they don't want to be discredited. I, on the other hand, as a medical doctor, didn't care what people thought. I said, you know, if you don't believe it, fine. Fuck off. Anyway. Charming. Okay, so that is actually an activation of the astral cosmos and an interface between yourself and the so-called spirit world. And during such an experience, you may have an encounter with an ancestral being, someone who was on this planet before you. It could have been a grandmother or grandfather. My great aunt, who I was very close to, visited me the day she passed away and came into my room that night. And I saw her as a 30 or 40-year-old, beautiful, and then she went off and she said goodbye to me that way. That was a very real experience. I didn't even know she had passed away. I found out the next day. That is a very real experience. And then there are other consciousness that are entities that are not human, but not ET. All right, this is the part that gets everyone stumbled. And these are beings that reside in other conscious dimensions and other dimensions that are not physical planets with physical star systems with material bodies, but they're conscious, they're living, they're thinking, they're volitional, they have will, and they can push into an interface with this dimension under certain conditions. And those are, strictly speaking, interdimensional beings of different kinds. And some have had experiences with what they would call very high angelic-like beings. Others have had experiences with some very rather unfriendly entities and what have you. And so those are absolutely real, and they can be quantified in some of the classified labs. And in fact, the technologies that exist in very advanced laboratories can tap into those dimensions and bring them into this dimension. There's such a project going on right now in Salt Lake City. So I think that what you have to understand is that these other dimensional realms have beings that are neither human nor extraterrestrial as you would think of extraterrestrial, meaning someone from another star system, from another planet, with a spacecraft, and it's traveling across the distances of space-time using advanced technological systems. But as they do so, here's the confusion. There's an intersection. They are crossing into the ETs that are in this material cosmos, have technologies that look like this. They look like that. What do I mean? You're not going to take an object and accelerate this to the speed of light and beyond to go from the Andromeda galaxy to here, that's 2.5 million light years away. Why? Because in this form, as it would approach light speed, it would take on infinite mass. Therefore, you employ a type of physics, resonant field high-frequency physics, where this all the elements within it, subatomic, atomic, molecular, resonantly, if you understand spin theory, we won't get into too much of the physics of this, tilts it out of this dimension into the, let's call it, near astral. This. The interface between this and the astral, between your body and the astral, there's an interface. There's a layer that you can slip along. And that's how you go from one star system to another. And I'm dropping a very big secret here. Because this is why people will see an extraterrestrial vehicle and it will vanish in front of their eyes. People say, oh, it cloaked itself. It didn't just cloak itself. You could walk straight through it. It has shifted out of this dimension just enough, tilting. Let's take the spin and angular momentum of the subatomic molecular structure of that craft and everyone on board. A little bit out of this fixed linear space-time so that it can appear to disappear and dematerialize. And then, boom, it pops on over the outback of Australia a nanosecond later, or instantaneously. Or it simply bilocates. We'll get into this. Again, one of the Vedic cities of the ancient Vedas, cities are the powers and abilities and consciousness that developed, is bilocation, trilocation, dematerialization, levitation, solid objects going through another solid object. All of those cities that can be developed, SIDDHIS, are abilities that are innately within every human being, but also every extraterrestrial, but they can become routinized or scientifically applied by civilizations advanced enough in their science and technology. Does this make sense? So here's where you get a big confusion, because there are a lot of people having experiences with these, and even beings that are not even in the astral, but in the pure thought realm, and they will think it's extraterrestrial because they know it's not human. Guess what? It's neither. And so there has to be this discernment, because in the UFO space, there are a lot of different phenomena, plural, being described as one phenomenon. Big mistake. That is the first fundamental mistake of the UFO studies area. And it needs to be corrected, because it's being exploited by the intelligence community to fool everybody. This is where I'm going with this. Does this make sense yet? Or I lost anyone? Okay, this is sort of your introductory thing about the cosmology here. The reason, understanding this seems really arcane, but let me give you a couple examples besides the lucid precognitive dream. Let's say, I'll give you an example of a Lockheed Martin Skunk Works guy. Now, here's a little interesting story. A lot of these military witnesses, it's kind of transactional. I hate to use that term. They come to me to give me information because they want to pick my brain about stuff they don't understand. Does that make sense? Okay, but that's fine. I'm happy to teach. The word doctor, docere, from the Latin means to teach, so there you are. So this one man approached me, and Don Phillips, Lockheed Skunk Works, and he was just going to be a military and Skunk Works witness dealing with a radar case of these objects at a Skunk Works facility where he was working. And you can read his testimony in the book and also on our YouTube site, which is youtube.com/sdisclosure, as in serious disclosure, sdisclosure. So that has about 70 of these top secret military witnesses up there for anyone to see who wants to take the time to look at all of it. But one of the reasons he contacted me, he told me this story. He said, I'm happy to be a witness to this. It happened ages ago in the 60s or something. But I really want to know something and have explained to me something that I've never understood. Because back many years ago, he was studying to be a Rosicrucian. And he was going through some training program to do what's called astral projection. I've never taken the course, but apparently they're trained to go from their physical body and then go out with their astral body and under volition have a controlled sort of journey. And he was really studying this hard. And finally, one day, his teacher came in and said, look, Don, you're ready to do this. You're just mentally, intellectually, hung up on it. Just let go, relax, go lay down on your bed and do it, and just intend that you can do it, which is a really key point to meditation and doing the cities. You just intend that you can as if you can, and you do, right? Okay, so he did it, and sure enough, boom, he launched up out of his body, but as he called it, an uncontrolled launch, went up through the ceiling of his house and the roof of his house into the atmosphere, and he went up to and slammed into an extraterrestrial vehicle that was up in high orbit, and he recognized instantly what it was. Now, anyone who's had a lucid dream or an out-of-body experience, you know that what you see is even more real than this looks here. It's like this hyper-reality. It's beautiful. And that's what you experience in your near-death experiences as well. But in his case, here was this ET craft, and it was up in the atmosphere. But he says, I don't understand. I wasn't in my physical body. I wasn't in this. But when I hit the craft, it moved. And he said, I should have just gone right through it, but how could the density of my astral energy light body affect the ET craft this way? I said, because they were of like density. The ET craft, if anyone was looking up in the sky, would have not have been visible. It would have been shifted into the, quote, near astral. And there was enough similarity of the resonant frequency of that astral body that you launched out into the sky with, and the ET vehicle that was shifted just out of 3D and 4D, but was hovering there. They don't have to be traveling that way. They can just hover. You won't even see them. You have to sense them. And he did tell a funny story. He said, well, it was really kind of embarrassing because I popped into the inside of this craft, and there were these ETs at a console that looked at me like, my God, why don't you watch where you're going? And you clumsy cosmic traveler. And he was actually quite embarrassed by it. I said, well, yeah, it was an interplanetary diplomatic faux pas. You don't just barge in. Now, that's a really true story. He didn't understand this. He was a scientist, and he was also someone who had worked in a lot of classified projects, and he understood the human experience of the spirit world, let's call it, and the astral body, and near-death experiences and things like this. But he did not understand why the extraterrestrial vehicle would have been affected by his astral body that way and actually bumped and moved. And I said, well, because at that point, it was shifted into an energy form that was very similar to the density, the quantifiable, and it is quantifiable, density of your spirit body, your astral body. He says, oh, that makes sense. I said, yeah, it's actually not hard to figure this out once you understand this. If you understand the entirety of all that exists is consciousness, shifting and phasing in different densities, and that includes this podium and everything. Everything is conscious. And everything is consciousness phasing in a different way. Now, luckily, before I was a meditation teacher, before I was a doctor, I became a meditation teacher with Marion and Jeff Kramer, who are here from the local area. 44 years ago, we met out at MIU and became meditation teachers together in my misspent youth. It was awesome. And it was very good that I did that before I went into medicine and all of this, because it laid a foundation for me to understand what is the reality, not only of the human condition, the deep spiritual cosmic level of human potential, but also of space and time, which is also conscious. The entire cosmos is a conscious hologram that is awake, and everything in it. Now, the civilizations that have figured out how to go from one star system to another have mastered the science of consciousness very well. And they understand that, and then they can develop technologies where it interfaces with, say, communication systems. So that they have a little black box. No, it's not an Apple iPhone, but it'll be a little thing, and they can think to it, and it transmits the information, thought to thought, person to person. So you can say, well, couldn't you do that telepathically? Yes, you can, but there's a factor of error there. Whereas if it can be done scientifically and precisely, then you develop that capability, which is what they have. But it also means they have those technologies that cross over into the propulsion systems, teleportation systems, materialization, dematerialization, etc. These were all the things that began to be drilled down on hard between the early 20th century and today. So about 100 years of classified research. We're going to get into this. Therefore, if it sounds confusing to you, it's only because you have to stop for a moment and think, what is within me? I have a physical body. I'm in this physical room on a physical planet going around a physical star. But I also have within me my body of light, the essence of my reality, the causation, the thought being, the tone within yourself. There is actually a resonant tone, like a mantra, but it's unique to everything in creation. That is like a standing wave that manifests, and it's called the thought, sound component of thought. That's what a mantra is. And then deep within us is this transcendent level of consciousness. And we're all part and parcel of that field. And that's why there is no separation in space and time once you understand that every point in space and time and all matter, this is where entanglement theory and what Einstein called the spooky effect, where he observed that something in one place was affecting another place instantaneously, and he called it spooky. But that's what non-locality in physics is. Right? You've all heard of non-locality. This is the ultimate non-locality, is this state of transcendent consciousness, which, FYI, is folded within every single one of you. What the samadhi state is what you sit and you meditate and you enter into that. And sometimes you get it clearly, sometimes you don't, but that's what the meditative process can lead to. And some people call that awakening or enlightenment or what have you. It's really the ordinary state of consciousness. You are always that, whether you recognize it or not. That's the beauty of this. Now, your individual ego may not recognize it or even understand it, but then phenomena happens, like intuition, precognition, lucid dreams, etc., and so on. And miraculous things, where you hear about people who suddenly are able to pick up or almost levitate a car off a child, way beyond what any human strength should be able to do when they need to, because they put their intention on it. So, you see what I'm saying? So, we all have that within us, every single one of us, but also every single extraterrestrial being. So just remember that as we go through this. Now, that capability can be exploited for the good, the common good, for enlightenment, for healing, free energy, all kinds of things. Or it can be used as a weapon system. So I'm not trying to scare the hell out of you, but by the end of this, you will be. And, but don't be. But you probably will be, but I'm going to tell you at the end why you shouldn't be. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And this is a little more of a deep dive into what we call alien. And the reason I want to call this out for what it is, I mentioned it a moment ago, there are all kinds of phenomena being called alien. And I've met with people who've had encounters with, like a poltergeist You know what a poltergeist is? Somebody who's passed away and comes in and is, moves something around. They say, oh, it was an alien in my house. Well, it was no such thing. It was not an extraterrestrial biological life form from another planetary system. It was someone who lived in that house 200 years ago and is pissed off that he died somehow, unfortunately. Now, a lot of people have had experiences with beings from other dimensions that are not extraterrestrial that can have that effect in this plane, and they will think it's an ET, and it isn't. It's really important for you to get this. So what is being called alien and what has been kind of thrown all together into one category are actually extraterrestrial, and these are the ones that are transdimensional interstellars. I call them TDIS. These are ET beings capable of interstellar travel using these advanced transdimensional technologies where they go from one point in space-time to another, but not in a linear way. They're dropping out of linear space-time and traversing these dimensions, which means that they're not limited by the normal limitations on matter and space and time. Because otherwise, there'd be no way they could go from another star system to here. That's how they're doing it. But there are also ETs that people can have experiences with that are planetary bound. Let's say that, I doubt anyone in this room travels around to different galaxies, maybe, I don't know, but unlikely. But in consciousness, you could go to another planet, and you could actually visit an ET civilization, and you may see one that is at our stage of development or even perhaps more primitive. And that is through the field of consciousness and the ability to remote view and teleport using this subtle body. So people have had experiences with both interstellar transdimensional ETs that are passing through other dimensions, but are from other star systems and planets, but also ones that can be remote viewed or seen or experiencing consciousness. And some of those civilizations could also get here and visit, but without a spacecraft. They don't have that technology yet. Just like the Aboriginals had dream time as a routine way that they communicated at night in Australia. You know that story. And that's how they would know what to do the next day. And they'd meet a friend in the outback and they know where to intersect at some remote area because they did it during their dream. Well, you could do that. If you can do it 10 miles away, you can do it a billion light years away. Because you've transcended space-time limitation. I mean, it's very abstract ideas, but I'm trying to relate them to personal experiences that all of you have had, I'm sure. So now you're talking about civilizations that have, the ones that are interstellar, have very advanced artificial intelligence. What do I mean by that? Their spacecraft are bio-nano machines. Every special operations force guy I've dealt with who's come up across one of these objects that we have downed using electromagnetic weapons, we'll get to in a moment, since the 40s, that's where Roswell was, will tell you that the craft themselves were living, and the craft themselves were conscious. They were conscious to the point that AI, the artificial intelligence associated with the spacecraft, was at the level that the craft emanated the consciousness of the pilot. And the craft itself has a living, organic quality to it, even though it's a machine. So it's a bio-nano machine that's conscious. That's very different from the clunky things Lockheed Martin's making. I'm giving you a little hint here of how you can tell the difference between a covert military UFO and an actual ET spacecraft, interstellar, transdimensional. Zing, got it? Little teachable moment there when you go out into the stars and you're watching. So those spacecraft that are interstellar have this ability to emanate the consciousness of the occupants. And they actually have their function in movement according to the thought. Now, often they're touching a panel and thinking, and then the craft will go here or there or what have you, or materialize or dematerialize. Very, very advanced stuff. not your 777, Boeing 777. Now, so these, so the craft are interfacing with the beings, but then their communication systems are there are two ways that this is happening. There's technology that is assisting their consciousness. So let's say they want to see another star system on a planet called Earth, and they may be 1 billion light years from here. They can connect to that, and it is an augmentation system, a magnification system that is electromagnetic but very advanced, that enables them to see using consciousness. So the technology is assisting the remote viewing function that is innately within all sentient beings. Does this make sense? But there's the reverse, and that's the consciousness-assisted technology. So there are technologies on board, all the technologies on board these ET craft can also be interfacing with the consciousness and thought, in coherent thought, not random, but very directed, coherent, intent thought of the ETs on board. How many people have had a fairly close encounter and seen a craft and felt that it was awake? Felt that the craft itself was awake? Yeah, they are. But they're awake. They're actually just an extension of the consciousness of the occupants. So the civilizations that have been around 10 to the 7th, 10 to the 8th, 10 to the 9th years, millions to 1 billion years longer than we have. Both their technologies and their consciousness would be at the celestial/angelic level, but they still have planetary systems, star systems, physical worlds. But everyone on that planet, even at the time of birth, is born into a state of cosmic consciousness and enlightenment at the time of birth. Eventually, humans will evolve into one of those level 12 civilizations. We're a level 0, by the way. Michikaku makes this thing. We have to get to level 1, which means you're peaceful, not destroying your environment, and not killing each other. Well, we ain't got there yet, all right? We're trying to, right? That's what we're working towards. Well, some of us. Most people, 90+%. So that's another thing to remember. In our CE5 expeditions, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, we'll be having an experience where the experience with an ET civilization will be very similar to an experience with one of the higher angelic celestial, but they're not, and they have spacecraft. I loved it when Monsignor Balducci, the senior theologian at the Vatican, that Paula Harris, who couldn't be with us today, she's in Europe, introduced me to, and he was a senior theologian to Pope John Paul, and he said to me, angels and demons don't need flying saucers. Simple statement, true statement. Think about it. And we had a wonderful discussion, and his testimony is in the disclosure material as well as the senior astronomer for the Vatican Observatory and Project. Most people haven't read it. It's there. And they confirm all of this. But my point is, the civilizations that are extraordinarily advanced are going to really look like magic. Now, I have to point out to people, let's take a step back to all the, sort of time-centered, reductionist scientific people on the planet listening to this. This cell phone, if you went back in time and handed this to Thomas Jefferson, or worse, to Salem, Massachusetts, you would be considered a warlock, a witch, something. I mean, to have something and be showing a video on this from another part of the world, everything we're using today would look like magic to someone only 200 years ago. Now let's extrapolate our technological development that we know about in the non-classified world, the world of CNN and the New York Times, i.e. lame. Well, they don't know anything, and they're not going to know anything. So, to quote Spook, the first time I was going to brief the CIA director, he says, the president and the CIA director don't know anything, and they're not going to know anything. That's how he worded it. What a nasty piece of work. Anyway, so this is something for you to think about, is that if we're talking about civilizations that are in the thousands to millions of years more developed than we are. Extrapolate how we've developed since, say, the early 1800s to now, 200 years. And factor in that about 100 years of that period, the big breakthroughs in science, technology, energy, propulsion, anti-gravity, even consciousness technologies have been suppressed and sequestered into unacknowledged special access projects. Now extrapolate a few thousand years forward. That's who and what we're dealing with. One civilization we had contact with at Joshua Tree was a senior ambassador named Bijou that we took a photo of. Some of you have seen it. And when I was asking him, you know what his IQ was, we had a series of electromagnetic devices that we were using for binary yes-no confirming communication with the civilization. I said, my sense is that your IQ is around 450. And it signaled yes. And so, you know, most average Americans, 110, 115. And it's an algorithmic scale. So you're dealing with civilizations that are very, very advanced, incredibly intelligent, highly conscious. And we have to figure their technologies are going to be a corollary, are going to parallel that development. Now, the good news is we're also developing that way. They've done studies with meditators. People who meditate actually have their IQs and go up. Everyone's told that you're stuck with what you're born with. Not true. Not true. They actually can go up as you develop higher states of consciousness. We'll get into this, and this is another subject. But so imagine civilizations that have been involved with conscious evolution with technological corollaries for thousands to millions of years longer than we have. So just keep that in mind as we go through this. So this phenomenon of interdimensional weirdness often gets lumped into this experience with actual ETs. And then you get into the mother of all clusterfucks, as the Marines call it. And it's, excuse my French, but the French would be, mon Dieu, that's not French. But this, where you're dealing with classified, unacknowledged, special access projects that have the ability, and have had the ability since the 50s and 60s, to simulate, like a simulator, alien experiences. And just a short list of those would be things that look like UFOs that have been termed ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles. These were first being worked on in the 40s and 50s. I have a gentleman that I've been meeting with whose father is a member of the Majority Intelligence Committee, MAGIC, and a senior U.S. Senator, former senior U.S. Senator. And, you know, he was talking about the fact that his grandfather, Paul Mellon, had gone over to Germany at the end of World War II and retrieved the secret weapon that Hitler was working on, and that was a disc. And it was and they also had a bell that was electromagnetic-gravitic, sort of anti-gravity. But they hadn't worked out the bugs. They couldn't really control. They would wobble and crash, and they hadn't got it perfected. We got the atomic bomb before they perfected the anti-gravity devices. However, Paul Mellon, who along with Alan Dulles and a few other people were key to founding the CIA, went over with George Patton, General Patton, and brought it back to the United States along with the top Nazi scientists under Operation Paperclip. And that mainstream history books have been written about Operation Paperclip. This is not a conspiracy theory. And these were people like Herman Oberth and Werner von Braun and a lot of other really brilliant scientists who had worked on these sort of technologies, brought them in, and they became the foundation of our not only intelligence community, but our early aerospace research and development community in the United States, which my uncle, who worked on the lunar module, was involved with Northrop Grumman, but they were, a generation before him even, in the 40s. So an interesting side note, George Patton wanted to disclose these technologies to the public for the good of humanity. He was assassinated by the Wetworks teams. Wetworks are assassination squads, because he wanted to do so. And the result is, during the Eisenhower years, the projects that were dealing with this area of research, both extraterrestrial and man-made, came together in these unacknowledged special access projects, although they were run into separate compartments. So let me explain what I mean here. And you had all the way back to the 20s, T. Townsend Brown, working with very high voltage frequency systems where, in crystalline materials, where he would have objects levitate, right? This is a matter of public record. And his work then got pulled into the RAND Corporation, and the Air Force, later into the Air Force. But there were also experiments going on in Germany, the Klossky-Frost experiment and some others in the late 20s. So by the time the 40s came around, there had been a lot of experimentation with VHV, I call it, very high voltage systems that at certain cycles per second, let's call it hertz, and resonant fields, and combined resonant fields with specialized materials, crystalline materials and what have you, would result in a lifter effect, anti-gravity effect, mass cancellation. So those got developed between the 20s and the 40s. This is why I call the chapter in that book and in the movie, The Lost Century. There's a whole lost century of technology. We're running around with jet engines and cars running ExxonMobil gasoline unnecessarily for 100 years. And we're paying the price now for the environment and geopolitically. But keep in mind that these technologies were on the radar scope of classified projects long before the end of World War II. A man who lived here in Denver, some of you may have known Dr. Altshuler. How many people knew Dr. Altshuler? He was a hematologist, pathologist, wonderful man. He's passed away. His uncle was General Jimmy Doolittle of World War II. And all of you have heard of Foo Fighters, I presume. Well, not the band. So Dave Grohl named the band after this, what I'm about to tell you. The Foo Fighters were these things that we call UFOs in World War II that were zipping around our aircraft and what have you. We thought it was a covert Axis, German technology. The Germans thought it was a covert Allied US-British technology. So FDR, Roosevelt, sent General Doolittle over to the theater of operations to look into this. And he looked into it and studied it and came back and told FDR, this was in the 40s, early mid-40s, and said, "Sir, those are interplanetary vehicles," quote unquote. So this goes back at least 70-some years, and probably longer. The part that people forget is that the human mind and an extraterrestrial mind can discover the same laws of the universe because the laws of the universe are universal. Important point. Very important point. So there was this accelerating discovery of electromagnetic, transdimensional, and anti-gravity sciences in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s that then got potentiated greatly by the retrieval of extraterrestrial vehicles. The most notorious being the Roswell crash, which I'm sure you've all heard of, but that is by no means the only one, nor was it the first one. There were ones in the 30s and 40s. And those extraterrestrial technologies were then put into a compartmented operation, TSSCI, top secret, special compartmented information or intelligence, that was unacknowledged, to be studied. And then there were people doing at the same time work in the conventional anti-gravity, let's call it, electromagnetogravitics is what it is properly called, anti-gravity and other systems. And there are very few that would communicate between the two. That was a highly specialized group of people that could cross between the conventional R&D labs that were classified and unacknowledged and the extraterrestrial research projects that were also unacknowledged, because compartmentalization is the name of the game of secrecy. A man who's recently surfaced and is working with me has been in, was cleared to 18 of these unacknowledged special access projects, or USAPs, and he's providing me information about these 18 projects, and he was in them between 2002 and 2012. So it's a lot of current information. We'll get to that in a moment. Now, what I'm trying to portray here is something you need to know historically, because everyone will say, oh, we have these spacecraft that are ARVs at Lockheed Martin, in Northrop, and Boeing, and all these outfits that are in EG&G. Those are, people say, oh, those were all based on ET spacecraft. They were not. They're a combination of man-made breakthroughs in science and technology that was classified, being pushed along by the study of extraterrestrial technologies, which is a much heavier lift, much harder to do, because you're looking at something you have no clue what it could be used for. The other part of that's being developed and has been developed for some years is this area, the programmed life forms. These are what people normally call aliens, the grays, the this, the that. I know men who've worked in those labs making these little creatures. They're kind of boogamy. They're sort of creepy, but they have integrated circuits in their cortex, but they are also biological. So there's a genetic program that will take genetic material from a dead or living extraterrestrial, develop it, and then put in integrated circuits, and then create a sort of robotic creature that passes quite well as an alien. So I'll give you a timeline. Anti-gravity, gravity control, October 1954 is when that was mastered. Programmed life forms were later in the 60s, 70s, 80s. In the 50s and 60s, they were using a lot of stagecraft with people made up to look like an ET. I've talked with some intelligence people who said, oh yeah, we take someone who is very short or very unusual looking and do a certain kind of makeup like in Hollywood and put them on board one of these ARVs and have them abduct somebody. Very effective. Stagecraft, it's called. The electromagnetic interdimensional portals are even of greater concern, and some of you have heard of these sort of events happening in places like Montauk and other facilities where, also at the Lockheed Skunk Works, and I remember meeting with the Skunk Works, very highly classified officer. Actually, it was a man who was introduced to me by the head of Lockheed International. And they had a laboratory where they could hook people up to an electromagnetic console, tap into these other dimensions, not ET, and bring into 3D an actual being from that dimension. And it'd be running around the lab like some kind of monster or boogum. Very advanced stuff in the hands of some very strange people with an agenda to deceive. Counterintelligence is all about deception. How many ARVs have been created and so far in total on the face of the earth or underground, and how many of those are privately or corporately owned, and how many are government owned? That's a good question. They number in the thousands. It's not just a few. They've gone through multiple generations of these man-made UFOs from the 50s to now. Pretty much every form and shape that an ET craft has taken, they've tried to replicate. Now, here's an important distinction. When you're up close and see one of these that are man-made, you're going to notice there are seams, rivets, sections, parts. The ET craft do not have those. They're seamless. And just a quick example of ET manufacturing. When we manufacture something, we dig something up out of the ground and then smelt the iron or the aluminum or whatever, and then make sheets of metal and rivet them together, blah, 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 right? No, that's not how an interstellar civilization manufactures. Which is why all these things about, oh, they have to come to the Earth because there's such things here they have to have. I'm going, oh yeah, right. You know nothing about transdimensional interstellar physics. So you're able to set up a standing wave, a resonant field, that is in the near astral, like a blueprint, like an architectural blueprint, and resonate it and materialize it, bring it into this dimension, all in a part. That's why they're seamless. And this is why one of the comical stories I like to tell is this captain of a naval contract vessel that was retrieving ICBMs that were being fired downrange in the South Atlantic contacted me years ago because they had one of these ET craft on radar at night, and they were able to triangulate it, and apparently their command center hit it with one of these electromagnetic weapons in, I believe, 1963. And the captain of this research vessel that ended up retrieving it the next day went in, he contacted me mainly to give me the information, but also he had another one of these questions that he had that he couldn't understand. And the ET was in a metallicized sort of uniform, and it was all one piece. And it didn't have any zippers or buttons or anything. And he was this old, crusty Navy guy. He says, what I don't understand, how in the world could he have gotten in and out of that? There's no way to get in it, no way to get out of it. He would have had to live in it all his life. I said, no. They set up an electromagnetic field, and it actually form fits, materializes around him, all in one piece, in a fraction of a second. And the uniform is in of itself also integrated into his bioelectric field and communication systems. So it's not just clothing. You know, I think what you have to understand is that you're dealing with civilizations whose technologies are not what we're trying to anthropocentrically project on them. So there are thousands of, and they're not just in the US, they're in underground bases, underwater bases, Australia, UK, or around the world, that are man-made. But they're not used all that much, but they've gone through a number of series of developments, but they're not at the level of refinement of a transdimensional interstellar spacecraft. There's a question here if I think that all or some abduction experiences are instigated by the military or the alphabet agencies. Yeah, let me be really clear about this. There are people who've had contact with ETs, and they may have been frightened or startled by it, and there are people who have been abducted by things that look alien that absolutely are being done by the intelligence community, and there's an area of overlap where people don't know what's going on because the stagecraft, the ability to hoax one versus the other is so good. So there are people who have had actual contact with ETs and have actual on-board experiences. That's how I got involved with this, from an event that happened with me when I was 18. And then there are people who have had very invasive events happen from the intelligence community and paramilitary operations that look 100% alien but aren't. And then sometimes you don't know which was which. So I'm not saying people haven't had contact at all. I'm just saying that you have to have this in your differential diagnosis, as we'd say in medicine. And one of my concerns is, you know, I was contacted years ago by the head of something called the Intruders Foundation that Bud Hopkins had. And the executive director called me up and he says, Dr. Greer, you don't know how right you are. We have a lot of people in our group that have said they've been abducted. And in their memories, they see that the things that look like aliens are actually being commanded and directed by military personnel. But that's all being sanitized out of the reports to the public. On the other hand, people have had actual contact with ETs where it was a positive experience or a healing experience or an enlightenment. Those we leave out totally. And there is this sampling skew, selective data cherry picking of stuff that has gone on in the abduction and UFO research community for 40 years or more. That's worrisome, because what that means is the public is only being presented with the stagecrafted disinformation part of the picture, and the rest gets taken out. I didn't believe it when I first heard it, and it turned out it was 100% true. So this is where I become very questioning of, when someone has an experience, I have to drill down on what part of it might have been actual ET, or was it something being done by these advanced systems, electromagnetic, mental, physical, transdimensional, that the intelligence community has. Because I know they have them, and I know they've deployed them many, 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 many times, probably thousands of times. The question always is, if you can't tell the difference, then what do you make of it? Then you just say, well, we don't know. You have to be agnostic. I mean, sometimes you don't know what the initiating source of the experience was. But you have to keep an open mind and try to get more data, more information, and try to get to the truth. I mean, after all, this is, science and also exploration. It's about finding the truth, wherever it leads you. Now, this particular truth has made me quite hated in the UFO subculture as sort of an apologist for the evil aliens. I'm going, well, I'm just trying to explain what's actually going on.